a single, like, a snack-sized portion of every individual on the lifeboat.
Is there any calf meat left? I feel like we're out of calf meat. I don't want to eat bicep. It's too chewy.
Starting Grimdark Media with talking about lifeboat cannibalism is maybe the most appropriate thing we've ever done.
Possibly. Yeah, it's just a hypothetical. It's
something Jay and I have ever discussed at length or thought about.
It's just a hypothetical.
Almost all the time.
It's a hypothetical.
So hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of Grimdark Media. We are on to talking about literature. And this was your pick this time around.
Yeah, it was. And we kind of talked about this right before we started recording, but I feel like the danger is that we're both going to be inclined to do the deep dive and find the thing people haven't heard about, which is cool. And we should do a lot of that because I'm sure people would be happy to discover new things.
I did talk about Space Hunter Adventures in the Forbidden Zone on my live stream this week at length.
Nice.
And it's on the list now. Just because Michael Ironside as Overdog is one of the great treasures of modern cinema.
I'm down with, could get some Michael Perry in there. Like,
yeah, Ernie Hudson and Molly Ringwald.
Yep. Just the all-star team. But so I decided if it was my pick, I was going to go with something foundational. And so we're doing Call of Cthulhu, the actual short story Call of Cthulhu. There are a few reasons I picked this. Like, I'm a huge Lovecraft fan, as are you. Like, I like a ton of things Lovecraft has written. And one of the things that anybody who's read a lot of Lovecraft, but who has any kind of objective eye for it, should be able to tell you, is Call of Cthulhu is not one of his best stories, and it's probably one of his weaker stories.
It's the one where you feel the anthology format that he had the most, I think. Because I believe, and I might be wrong about this, but I believe this is one of those Weird Tales ones where each of the individual sections is a weaker, like a publication.
And they
stitch it back together.
The entire story is like 23 pages split into 3 completely disparate chapters.
Different vignettes.
And he himself in his own lifetime admitted that he did not think it was a particularly good piece of writing. The reason I wanted to cover it is, putting aside the fact that it's the most iconic title for anybody who's not a huge Lovecraft fan, the other thing that's critically important about this piece of Grimdark Media is this is the thing that all of his friends and professional colleagues of the era drew inspiration from to then become authors in the realm of the Cthulhu mythos. So it's funny that a thing that is not one of his better pieces of writing, that he did not think was one of his better pieces of writing, inspired a ton of other authors, a ton of other very successful authors in a lot of cases, to then get into his headspace and his world and build that out even more.
It's funny too, because you and I picked, it's funny because we both own multiple copies of multiple books. I picked the best of H.P. Lovecraft, Blood-Curdling Tales of Horror and the Macabre. I found this book in the Whitby Public Library when I read this book cover to cover on a bus ride to Saint-Anna, Quebec on my grade 7 ski trip. Nice. There's a throwback to like the stuff that you only people of like the 80s and 90s generation probably remember as ski trips. We went on a school ski trip. We had after school ski club that we did too. And I got this out of the library purely because of the cover. The cover illustration of this book is one of the great, and it's funny because Del Rey uses this illustration, this one vignette, on every book they do in this era.
Yeah.
And they just cut it into different pieces. So like I think the Screaming Tree is the dream cycle. There's like a weird like magus in the distance, like chanting that they.
That was the thing back in the day, that when you went into a bookstore and those were all arrayed next to each other, it was striking. It was the what's the moment in The Mouth of Madness when he starts piecing together all the different book covers? It's that. It's that in the real world, and you're experiencing.
Exactly. So I got that because of this, and this is his best. But you picked a different one, which I also own.
Yeah. So really cool. And it's funny because I own the one you brought. So I actually brought H.P. Lovecraft and Others: Tales of the Cthulhu Mythos. So this is, I think it might be the most current printing.
It is
of this.
Yeah. Also, fantastic art on the cover.
Yeah, very Geiger-inspired, very Geiger-esque. But one of the reasons I liked this is the table of contents page, which sounds like a ridiculous reason to like an anthology collection, is a reminder to me of how many different authors that he inspired. And some of them, if you're into the Cthulhu mythos, you'll recognize them. But there's a bunch of them that you do not have to be into this to be like, holy crap, Stephen King writes Cthulhu stories. Robert E. Howard writes Cthulhu stories, and again, lots and lots.
And
Clark Ashton Smith, like
August Derleth, Robert Bloch, Brian Lumley, like so much of that is inspired by this particular piece of fiction.
And when we get further on in our discussion today, we are definitely going to circle back to August Derleth and his role in the rest of it outside of the narrative.
It's funny because this is, if we go back, and I mean, we're going to get to that when we get to part 2 of this, the second section, because we're in like the preamble. We're still in loose horse shit, I'm pretty sure, but we've like introduced.
Are we recording right now?
I don't even know.
Is this?
Yes.
Are we on?
We're recording for 5 minutes.
Oh,
yes.
okay. Sweet.
For 5 minutes.
Get my hands above my waist. I think we're okay.
I think we're okay. We both have pants on. So the idea that like that this is like a wellspring.
Yeah.
And I do want to make a certain preamble thing before we get any further. There is some very objectionable shit in H.P. Lovecraft's writing.
Absolutely.
I want to make it super clear that Jay and I in no way support a very, I would say, insular, racist man's views of other people's species and othering. But this particular, it is never more prevalent than in this particular book.
No.
Or in this particular piece of fiction. This guy had abhorrent views and was a scared, artsy little man living with his ants.
So if I can, because a lot of people know that. A lot of people don't care. A lot of people do care, and they'd wonder why. I've seen a lot of dialogue like where people, when they're talking about things that Lovecraft has created or inspired, they still don't want to use his name.
Yeah.
Because it's like this specter of what a horrible person he personally was.
Yeah.
I will, not to pick and choose how anybody else engages with material like this. I'll be honest, because I live in a post-capitalist society. My level of comfort or engagement with buying material and things has always been where that money is going. Mm-hmm. And H.P. Lovecraft, died tragically young, died alone, has no inheritors,
and died poor.
Died poor.
Yeah.
There are living
stuff.
authors that I can't buy their stuff, because the notion that, out of my $20 purchase, a nickel of it makes it into their pocket, and I have to worry about what that nickel is going to get spent on.
Yeah.
But again, I don't want to sound like we're picking and choosing our morality, but buying the writings of a long dead author who is not benefiting from this in any way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. And also, I think that because we're doing kind of a academic appreciation of this and how it inspired people, that stuff happened, and no amount of revisionism is going to make this person an influential person in the Grimdark Media landscape.
I also think it's interesting because when you talk about what kind of paranoid, disturbed person he was, which he was, you wonder how much of that inspires his descriptor, not just his descriptors of real world people that he is saying problematic things about, but also how he describes monsters. Like, is this how an insane person, like a legitimately mentally ill person, sees people who are slightly different? It's interesting.
And that dread that he had for everyday life, for like everyday society and life and the people around him and the progress that was happening in the 1920s, right? Like that things were changing and he felt othered by it.
Yeah.
That creeps into the emotional landscape of what he's making. And I think we have artistically benefited from his weakness and his personal like struggles and trauma and illness. So that's just I think we should make a proviso about that.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Obviously some of what we're going to talk about, especially in this story in particular, if you go and engage with this stuff, you might feel the problematicness of it. And so we just want to kind of head on that.
Yeah, you will find
the other. This guy had views of other people and races and ethnicities that are gross. And he presents it that way.
You will find reading, great story, in my opinion. You will find reading descriptors of how he talks about other people from other cultures in this story probably offensive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most of you will probably find it offensive.
Yeah.
I find it offensive.
I find it offensive too. Yeah. All right. So I think we're ready for part 1. We already set sail?
Do we bother, or is anybody still watching after that?
I don't know. Maybe we just bummered everybody out. Like, I'm kind
of curious. If you check your YouTube videos, it's like that's the minute where everybody
drops off.
Everybody started watching baseball videos.
Yeah, they're like, "Oh God, what is this going to be? What are these two doing?" Well, I think it's time to set sail.
All right, so let's set sail. So
let's board our tramp steamer.
So again, and I can't stress this enough, this story is 23 pages long, and it's split into 3 completely separate and distinct chapters.
And there's a whole boat thing at the end too, which is great. So it's time to go bon voyage and set sail into a sea of I guess what I think takes place somewhere in the South Pacific. On
Part of it does.
On an island in the South Pacific. We're going to set sail bon voyage as our professors at the Miskatonic University bid us adieu. As we write for the Arkham News and start researching our papers, we will set sail into a grim future in part 1.
Testing, radio. This is where we spoil the entire story in Bon Voyage.
So lead on.
So in addition to setting the narrative tone, or I guess some of the narrative elements for his future writings, this I also find, just for any gamers watching, the narrative flow of this story feels the most like a Call of Cthulhu adventure. Mm-hmm. So our story opens with the discovery of this idol, this statue. And it's made of clay, or it's a sculptor who's making the statue out of clay, and he's inspired by these horrible images. Now, what's interesting about this to me is they constantly reference how horrible it is, but they give kind of loosey-goosey descriptions of it. Like, there are a lot of things in this story that are incredibly thoroughly described, but every time they describe the horror, there's a lot of fuzzy edges.
And our narrator is unclear. Our narrator is stitching together these 3 separate tales. So we have like a third-party narrator,
correct,
who is collecting these 3 stories from like an academic point of view. And I believe it all sets off because his uncle dies.
Yes.
That's right. And so our first one is this artist basically that he encounters.
Yeah. So this artist who's working with clay, who's making these horrible sculptures, which again, as somebody, once you read it, having other context, if you've read other Lovecraft, or if you've seen any Cthulhu stuff online, ABC, the Cthulhu kids books, any of that stuff, clearly the statue he's describing is Cthulhu. Yeah. It's the large octopus-headed, tentacle-faced monstrosity from beyond the stars,
crouching on like a plinth. It has like, it's funny because later on, the next encounter with one of these statuettes, we get a really good description of it actually.
Correct. Yeah, because as you move on, the statuette in this story is the Lochnar from Heavy Metal in terms of it's the linking element in the three different short versions. So as he discovers this, it's horrible. It's unnatural. They continually refer to it as horrible, unsettling, unnatural, without saying why. So as he researches and delves into this, we move into the second chapter. And it seems like I'm flying through this, but it's because these chapters are
like 8 pages.
Super short.
Yeah, it's like 8 pages, basically.
So the second chapter is him interviewing a police officer. And the police officer has overseen a raid of what they believe to be a voodoo cult. And while raiding this voodoo cult compound, they find they're all worshiping this statue. And again, now it's actually described a bit more than it is in the first chapter. Mm-hmm. So again,
he brings them the statue, doesn't he?
Yeah, because they have the statue.
Yeah.
So the police officer shows them they've got the statue. It's Cthulhu. But as the police officer is describing the raid where they acquired the statue, not that that's why they were there to put down a weird voodoo cult. He talks about other police officers losing their minds, going insane, being confronted by this unnatural chanting. This cult, which is massive, I think it numbers like 100 people at the gathering that they're at,
and they've captured a bunch of. It basically gets called in by the local like sharecroppers, who have to go out into like the swamp and the forest, and some of them have gone missing, and so they actually finally call the police, which they're very like reluctant to do. And there's like 20 cops that like march out there, and when they find this, and there's also like a story of like there being something in the woods.
There's something,
great white entity.
There's something in the woods, but that can't be true.
Yeah.
You must be imagining things or seeing things or...
And the cops basically like bring their firearms and they're like, no, science and reason will bring this to the darkness. And they march out there and find this huge fiery ring with these like hung settlers basically all sacrificed.
Yeah, it's all the people that have gone missing.
Yeah.
And then there's a plinth in the middle. Is that the correct term? The statue sits on it separately? Yeah.
Plinth, yeah. So
the plinth is like 8 feet high with a tiny statuette on top, and this is what they're all celebrating. So they end up, a bunch of these guys flee into the swamp. They end up capturing 47 of these cult members. They bring them back, but by the time they get back, only 2 of them are even fit to stand trial. So 45 of them are just locked up in insane asylums all over the place. 2 of them are put on trial and then hung.
Yeah. for like sacrificing a bunch of locals.
Pretty much.
Yeah, it gets pretty dark.
It gets very dark very fast.
And think about the context of when this is being written.
This is 1928. Or his published date is 1928.
But like, we're like in the mid-20s. This is like an incredibly violent and paranoid description of a cult in the woods, of something out there in the darkness, basically.
And I think what's interestingly effective about it is the description of the police officers and the people who don't understand what's going on, that they see it as being like a weird voodoo cult.
And they're not bothered by it. It's weird.
Yeah, because they expect that to be a thing, but they don't actually know what underlies that thing, which is so much worse. So during the interrogations, one of the prisoners basically reveals, because they've got no reason to hide any of this, because obviously they're worshiping an all-powerful, great old one that was here before the dawn of time.
The cops like, no, before the dawn of time. This predates us.
And the great Cthulhu sleeps, but he'll return one day, and we'll all be rewarded. Like, they have zero fear.
Yeah,
they have zero fear. And
he compares it to the details to like a northern Inuit like tribe, basically, that had like a similar one. He starts like picking at like the similarities in like the diction and the language, because they're speaking in a weird language too.
And part of it, I think, is hinting that this is either inspired by many different cultures, or it has inspired many different cultures.
It's like infiltrated cultures all over the world.
It's like the dictionary definition. Even though you've only found it once, at this point, it's becoming the dictionary definition of an out-of-place artifact. Because if you think this is a southern U.S. voodoo cult thing, and that's okay, so now we've decided where that comes from. Oh, but also you're going to find it in the Middle East.
Yeah, it's finding papyrus in South America. You're like, this shouldn't be here. Like, why is this here? No. Or finding Viking villages in Labrador, right? Where you're like, whoa, hang on, this doesn't make any sense.
So again, this is part of the reason why this is such a foundational part of the mythos, is because they're not actually giving you very much. They're not actually telling you very much, but they're laying this groundwork that this is much bigger than you think it is. And it's just beneath the surface. And it's everywhere, but it's nowhere that you can see it. And it's that sense of creeping horror. And this is the part to me that feels the most like a horror piece of its time. Is you shouldn't be frightened of what you are frightened of what you see. You should be far more frightened of what you don't see.
I think that point right there is what made it so inspirational to other writers. Was you got a hint of something and very explicitly told, hey, this is that, like, and it's funny because science is now kind of like the Younger Dryas impact, and like the idea that maybe there are civilizations way older than what we think of as civilizations. That hint of that very explicitly being said, but with no detail given, is the kind of like thought worm that would inspire other writers and other artists. Like that idea of like, what would those things be? Like, that's the imagination spark, I think, really, that is unsettling and leaves the reader wanting to know more details of,
because there's more.
Where else could it be?
Like, you can literally turn the last page of the story and wonder where the rest of the story is. Because that can't be the whole thing.
And it's kind of a throwaway in Act 2 with this police officer. And it's funny because they portray the police officer very much as like, he doesn't care about anything.
He is very much a grounded, normal, sane person against the backdrop of everything else going on in the story. And all of these things are, what's my role in this? What do I have to do? I have to find these people. I have to arrest these people. I have to stop these killings. That's it. Like,
it's funny how he puts that on a pedestal. He puts normalcy and like the idea of just being able to like deal with these like weird things without thinking about them too much as like a superpower that this cop has, where he's able to just like trudge through it all and come back just fine.
He's Keith David pre-sunglasses and they live.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. So the second chapter is actually the part with the police officers and the raid. This is actually by far the longest part of the story. It's where the bulk of the exposition happens. So your first chapter is sort of a tease. Something's awry.
This guy having weird dreams.
Your second chapter is this is that made manifest in the real world. We've found evidence of it, but still I mean, it's unnatural. It's unsettling.
It's weird that
why,
these two statues look the same.
Why is it so horrific? And then we get to chapter 3. And chapter 3, now we get on our boat.
Yeah.
So we're on our boat and I don't know why.
I think they do say tramp steamer. I'm pretty sure tramp steamer is like a term still back then. I love that term where it's like, who are you? We're a boat that goes where it's Firefly. It's basically tramp steamer is Firefly. It's the idea of like we go where the work is and we take jobs and our
some people might not be aware that there were ships on water before there were ships in space.
What?
Yeah, I know, right?
That's crazy. Okay.
Like some kind of sea pirate.
Some kind of water pirate.
Some kind of water pirate.
Some kind of Kevin Costner-esque water pirate.
So we have our tramp steamer.
Yep.
Traveling through, and again, I don't know why I don't remember, but I think you're right. I think it's the South Pacific. And then we're having the dreams again. We're having something is wrong. Something is unnatural.
We're coming too close to something.
And this is where the sailor on the ship, who again is relaying this to our narrator after
our lone survivor.
Our lone survivor. He's the Mark Wahlbergist guy in the story.
I was going to say he's the not Ben Fosterist of this.
But he realizes that they're passing over something.
Yeah.
That there is a city beneath the waves. And again, at this point, to my knowledge, in literary history, the only city beneath the waves is Atlantis, right? Like there's nothing dread underneath the water. This is kind of the first moment that I'm exposed to in literature where, no, there's something dark down there. Yeah. Like the dark depths of the ocean are more frightening than the dark depths of outer space.
What we don't know is more frightening. Whatever the unknown is.
So there is an ancient city. So this is the first time we also hear Ryla referred to in the Cthulhu mythos, underneath the waves. And it's not just an abandoned city. It's where Great Cthulhu sleeps. And this god is dead, but will also return to wreak his horrible, horrible vengeance.
Yeah. And then he was like an archpriest. Like we get more expanded on it in the future, but he was like they refer to him as almost like he's not even the worst there is. He's the sleeping high priest of the gods.
Of the worst there is.
Of the worst there is. And there's even more out there that he's dreaming of, and that his dreams are like infecting whatever's nearby. So it's almost like a weird like signal he's putting out as they
so kind of the reveal, such as it is, because it's not played up as a big Twilight Zone-esque reveal, is that they're not having their dreams, they're having his dreams.
That's right. And what they're seeing, that like city and all that strange stuff, is just the echoes of what's going on like thousands of meters beneath them.
And the realization is that the real horror hasn't begun, and that when the dreamer awakens, that is when the world will end. And that's where the story ends. It does, like we've talked about the different, and we'll get to this, I guess, but we've talked about the different elements of Grimdark. But that idea that your world is so much smaller than you think it is.
It's funny because I have a memory, because I read this recently, I have a memory of it having multiple endings. Isn't there one where he drives the boat into it and then somehow washes up and survives? Is that a different one?
I thought the thing was they return and that was the documentary. The Dream, the Vigilant.
No, they get chased by Cthulhu. Yeah, it's at the end of it.
The three men were swept up by the front. Yeah, that's why he's the only survivor.
That's right. That's why he's the only survivor. Is that like something wakes up and this like masonry starts jutting out of the ground and this immense horror rises up out of the water and he ends up crashing the boat into it, and then because they know they can't get away. And the final line is where is it? Out of the dream that came, rescue, the Vigilant, the Vice Admiralty Court, the streets of Dunedin, and the long voyage back home in the old house in Eggebird. So basically, he gets home afterwards. There was a bursting of an exploding bladder, a slushy nastiness as a cloven sunfish, a stench of 1,000 open graves, and a sound that the chronicler could not put on paper. For instance, the ship was befouled by an acrid and blinding green cloud, and then there was only a venomous seething astern, where God in heaven, the scattered plasticity of that nameless sky spawn, was nebulously recombining its hateful original form. So basically, he explodes the thing and watches it start to come back together as they escape.
And sorry, I guess the thing I should underscore is for them, that's the horror movie moment.
Yeah.
But for us as the reader, it's the reveal that it's not over.
That's right. That's right. And then it's just going to put itself back together.
Which again, to me, feels like the creeping horror. The creeping horror isn't, oh my God, a monster is attacking us.
Yeah.
The creeping horror is the monster will always be attacking
and
us.
that monster might not even been the thing that was dreaming. Like, we don't really know what it's going to be. We just know it rises up out of the waves. They crash into it and explode it. And then it starts pulling itself back together, which is this incredible, like, futility sense at the end of it all.
And again, like, we'll, and I'm sure we'll bounce back and forth through this as we talk about other things. That sounds tropey.
Yep.
But it's 1928.
And it's never been done before.
Yeah.
Like, how many horror movies, okay, so first of all, how many horror movies not called the Call of Cthulhu have that same ending? Have that same something nameless from the deep, basically, is like, I can think of some from the last couple of years. Like, on Underwater is a Call of Cthulhu story. Deep Rising with the evil sea cucumbers is like the same idea.
Well, even if you step completely away from horror and you step completely away from the whole undersea element, like, come on, is it that ending? That's the first moment you're actually scared that the T-1000 is going to stop Arnold in the second Terminator movie, right? Yeah. And so again, like, for me, and we'll talk about this for years probably as we cover all these different things. It's seeing that foundational, that sort of foundational, that raw material becoming something that it lands so hard, like it impacts so many people so much that would be truly terrifying. Yeah. That it then goes on to get, like, parts of it get cribbed and used in other things because of course that's frightening.
Things. That's right. And so while this, I think for a modern like fan of this kind of media to read this book today, so if any of you gone out and read it, before we post this or as I talked about it, you're going to be like, oh yeah, of course that's the kind of story this is. These themes are very common today. This is the first time this has ever been done. This is the time that sets off all of these iterations of this media over and over and over and over again. So I think it's so smart that you picked this as like one of the originals. Yeah,
and like I said, like, I know we will do a bunch of deep cut things, but like there's a few things where you look at it and you're like, do people understand today that this is where so many other things came from?
Yeah. And so I think that's where we have to transition again into part 2. I think we're ready to cut into, we've arrived at our destination. The tramp steamer has entered like Innsmouth Harbor, maybe, and we find ourselves.
Vigilance pulled us out of the water.
That's it. We find ourselves at the doorway, at the steps, basically, of a huge gallery, the dark exhibition of Grimdark art.
The legally distinct night gallery.
And we have a choice to make before we go any further into this gallery. Do we go to the gift shop to buy a product, or are we going into the gallery to look at art?
Tickets, please. Tickets. All lining up now for entry to the Dark Exhibition.
What do you think this is?
Well, so, again, I want to say that what I think it is and what the author thinks it is are actually two different things.
Interesting, okay.
Which I also think it's funny when you hear Lovecraft or read about Lovecraft, how he felt about the story versus how all of his friends and colleagues felt about the story. So I'm going to side with all of his friends and colleagues.
Right.
And it's art.
Yeah.
It is clearly art. It's new and it's fresh and it's foundational. And the funny thing about it is the artist, from his point of view, it's product. He had to sell a story. He rushed a story out because he needed to get a paycheck.
Yeah.
And he's not proud of the story that he put out.
I almost feel like he didn't know where it was going to end. Like when he did part 1 with the dreams and the weird statue, he just did a premise and had no idea what the payoff was going to be. And then he wrote parts 2 and 3 and happened to do...
Well, he's been dead for nearly 100 years and we still don't know where it's going to end.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so it's funny because I have no reservations about saying it is definitely art.
Yeah.
And all of his contemporaries would tell you it is definitely art. And the artist who created the art would definitely tell you it's a product.
Yeah. And I would say that it has been so successfully commercialized into products. You just mentioned one.
Yeah, the
ABCs of Cthulhu. Like that is the example of the end state where this stuff ends up. Yeah. And I would 100% agree with you. At this point, he has accidentally innovated a bunch of concepts and themes that get picked up and inspire so many other writers, artists, and people for the next, we're coming up on 100 years.
Yeah.
It's going to be the 100-year anniversary of A Call of Cthulhu in 2028.
Yeah.
That's fucking crazy that this is a 100-year-old story now and that it has become an industry.
And it will still be inspiring people that probably don't even realize it's what's inspiring them, because they're actually being informed and inspired by something that was inspired by this. Like, we're generations removed from this. There's people who have written original works that draw this as inspiration, that their original works will be inspiring people 100 years from now. It's crazy.
And he's inspired by tonally romance era writers like Poe and like, you know what I mean? Like, Mary Shelley, and like, he's grown up on that literature, which is informing where he's taking his own stories. I think it's so funny that like tonally, this is him almost self-loathing, because I feel like he feels like he's writing an anthology, which he is, but he can't stand back from the three pieces of it to see how well it went together and the impact it had on people. He's incapable of separating the process of making it enough to stand back and actually see it like holistically, the way that the people who've now consumed it for almost 100 years are able to. All right, well, I'm glad we're in agreement on that. I think that's very funny. I think that's very interesting how we are in disagreement with the author, but we have 100 years of perspective of seeing it as like the launch pad.
Even at the moment of publication, like Robert E. Howard basically contacting him to tell him that he thought it was one of the best things he'd ever written, and it was one of the most inspiring things he'd ever written, and his reaction effectively being meh, like, nah. That's crazy to me. It's
crazy to think about Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan the Barbarian, being a contemporary of his. Like, that's like thinking about Neil Gaiman hanging out with like, I don't know, like a
Terry Pratchett.
Or Terry Pratchett. And like those guys were friends. Or Douglas Copeland and Terry Pratchett hanging out and being like, how did these giants, like, did they just go have a beer sometime? You know what I mean? Like, that's just, it's so crazy to think about them just being like acquaintances or friends.
One of the things that's interesting to me a little bit, like when you look at Howard and Lovecraft, right? Is that Howard's best known for Conan the Barbarian, right? And you can definitely see
all the Hyperborea stuff.
Yeah, and you can see a little bit of, I can see where you draw inspiration from this. But for me, my favorite Howard writing has always been Solomon Kane. And when you get into that, you can definitely see a lot more connective tissue.
Absolutely,
you can see where two authors respected each other's work.
One dealing in like dark sci-fi and the other one dealing in dark fantasy, basically, of like those two periods, and how like that hadn't been sort of coded into certain topics yet. All right, well, we're now leaving. I guess our time has expired in the Dark Exhibition, and we're moving on. And we're picked up in the streets, though, because we're raving lunatics now. We're talking to ourselves, eating our own fingers. And we end up spending a night in the Grim Asylum. We have to read all the writing on the wall. What are the themes, you think, that the people that come before us have, like, scrawled in their own blood? And what did we pick out as, like, the core themes and mechanics of the Call of Cthulhu?
Pack your bags and chew off your fingers. It's time to spend the night in the Grim Asylum.
Right. So I'm gonna say the setting is subversion, because it feels like the whole point of the story is to tell you that the real world you're living in is not really the real world. Like, you don't see what's right there.
I would absolutely agree, and it's funny how recurrent and how talked about that theme is, where he's presenting the everyday, police going on a police thing, an artist making his art. Right? A guy that lives on a sailing boat. And how like their normal day-to-day kind of what he considers blue-collar lives can run into the unknown.
Yeah, and none of them are looking for the unknown.
No, none of them are actively in pursuit of any of this stuff.
They're not the Scooby Gang.
No, exactly. They're not trying to get a clue.
The ship is not called the Mystery Machine.
No, I think we're both in agreement on that. So what else? What other ravings we saw? This is subversion, obviously, for the time.
So for scale, it's funny because my first thought is incomprehensibility, because I know that's where we're going in terms of the Cthulhu mythos. But I'm actually going to say immensity, because within the context of the story itself, and that's the thing that can be difficult to step back and look at just this in its own box, is within the scale of the story itself, the monster being massive and living underwater it's that sense of immensity. The hint of more is the fact that it is the high priest of this belief, and in fact not the god that it worships.
I would agree with you. I think my thread that I'm pulling out there, though, is that hint that this is culturally in every culture all over the world, because it's from a proto-culture. It's from prehistory, right? And that means that this cult is everywhere and nowhere all at once.
Yeah.
That sense of scale, to me, that was one of the most interesting things, I think, always in this story, was the idea that it's not just what we can't see, but that what we can't see is an endless cult of people in every walk of life across every culture, and that no matter where you go, they were there first. Yep. That to me gives that feeling of like, you can't fight something like that. It's too big and it's too unknowable.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Where they are in the life cycle, this is a lot harder to identify for me, because within the context of the story, you feel like the end of the story is the tipping point for the life cycle. Mm-hmm. Because again, you come into this story, everything is fine. It's not dystopian, right? Like people are just going about their lives, they're doing their jobs, they're doing whatever they is. And this story is the tipping point where your awareness means that your world has changed.
Yeah.
So I would
sorry.
say decline.
Yeah.
But it's not that steep decline that we're used to in most forms of Grimdark Media.
I think that's why entropy is the word it's basically the idea that, imagine the whole world is on a ticking clock, but no one knows. And now you're the one person that's aware that when this sleeper awakens, all of civilization could end. And it could be tomorrow, or it could be never in your lifetime, but you don't know, and so you always feel like you're on a tightrope now for the rest of your life.
Right.
Like, to me, that's that sense of like gradual erosion. It's in all of Lovecraft's literature, I think, like erosion of sanity, erosion of like society, erosion, because like he comes back to that theme over and over again, mm-hmm. talking about a lot of his paranoid theories about other cultures, like that's eroding like the things that he feels safe in. So entropy, I think, is the big that like slow death, where it's not about death necessarily. It's not about decline. It's that there is a slow erosion that's inevitable, and death is personal. Entropy is the universe around you. Death is about a person's story ending. Entropy is about everything ending, and that to me, I think, is the theme that I picked out of this. That the idea of that we don't hear the countdown of the clock.
Makes me want to ask if you read Sutter Kane.
I do. Little Sutter Kane. Yeah. That's why I ate my own fingers. That's why we're locked up in this asylum. This is what we get for reading Sutter Kane. What was our last one?
Two more, tone and emotion.
Right, yeah.
So for tone, I would say futility, and I would say I read all to the last page of the story before that would have been the tone. And when you have your final moment with the sailor, where you've defeated, for lack of a better way to put it, you've put paid in the moment to the monster. Like if you're thinking of it as a traditional monster story, and you're sailing off into the sunset, and the monster's coming back together. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. Like, it's been there for 1 million years. It'll be there for 1 million more. It was here before people. It'll be here after people. It's pointless. Yeah. It's all pointless.
Discovering this horrific truth doesn't change anything about this truth.
No.
It doesn't. And this truth doesn't care about you, and you knowing about it and you sounding the alarm about it is completely pointless. It doesn't do anything except for make you crazy. Because that's the interesting thing, is our recurrent narrator, the person who is taking us through this story, their revelation that these three things are related, because they're the ones they're basically our proxy in the story, and their realization, having not witnessed any of it themselves, but just basically through like uncovering these three different separate narrations, leads them to feel like the world's ending. Like, and that's what I think is great, is by reading it, we're put in the seat of that narrator, and we feel that same dawning realization that these three stories that have nothing in common, that are worlds apart, all hint to the idea that the world's going to end. And there's all this stuff, there's this vast world that you cannot see that's like getting louder. That the guy on the ship could hear the dreams when he was sailing over it. Now the guy in your backyard who's an artist can hear the dreams of this thing. And that's the like put together that I think is so great.
And I think the first 2 lines of the story both hit on that and are probably, when you look at all the people that were the writers that were inspired by this is probably the moment where if you had to define what it is for them, this is it. And the opening 2 lines of the story are, the most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of the black sea of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. Yeah. Now, that is, I mean, you want to talk about foundational for Grimdark, for the Cthulhu mythos, that is it. Like you're defining why people are losing their minds throughout all of these stories that come from this and many, many other horror stories.
And talk about a thesis statement. Talk about a punching opening line for a book. I think that the opening line sets the grimdark tone for the next 100 years. Like there's things that are tragic, there's things that are sad, there's things that are horrific in literature everywhere else. But that idea that we are basically safe only because we can't see what's outside the campfire light is such a primal mission statement for this story.
And it's interesting to me because even outside of the realm of grimdark, can you imagine any author of any genre who wouldn't be happy to write 1 or 2 lines that defined everything they would write after that well? Like,
and that even like if we were to say grim, right? That there's something that is horrifying and scary and bad and darkness. That mission statement defines what that means. Mm-hmm. If you want to define grim darkness, that opening line, that out there in the dark is terror and horror and death and entropy and awfulness. And the only reason we're safe is that we can't see it because of the darkness.
If you
like
can't
that
see
to
it,
me is,
don't look for it.
Oh, shivers. It's such a great line.
I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it.
All right, so that's our tone.
And our last is emotion.
Yeah.
And it's the Call of Cthulhu. How can I not pick insanity?
It has to be insanity.
It has to be insanity.
It has to be. It's well, I mean, and that's the second part of that statement is that we are confronted by those truths.
And I think the funny thing is that when you get to the end, you realize that the sculptor at the beginning was already going insane. Yeah. And that's not really given to you instantly in that first moment. But when you realize that your dreams have been invaded by this millennia-old alien monstrosity, well, no, that can't be right. So clearly it's time to go to the padded room.
I think that's the thing that he doesn't, I think as the reader, that's the thing that you finally put together at the end, which is he's presented these chronologically out of order. He's presented it near to far.
Yeah.
And both temporally and location. So he has a guy in his town having weird dreams making this statuette. He has a person a couple 100 miles away finding a statuette where people that believe in this stuff are embedded inside our culture. And then he has thousands of miles away a person pass nearby where this might be and encounter it. And so reverse basically chronologically and through distance, you realize, oh, it's already in our backyard. And the thing that happened earliest is the thing you're presented with last, and then you get that sense of it creeping towards you, and that whatever these dreams are, they're expanding and growing out.
It's that crane, quick crane zoom out shot.
Yeah. It's the light flickering on your island and the dark getting closer, basically. That you're on this island and that your light is slowly going out and the dark is getting closer and closer to where you are.
And to me, it's also, just to talk about writing style, it's one of those, and it's something we've lost more recently, but it used to exist a lot more in writing, in movies and everything, is it's another great example of less is more.
Yeah.
Because are all these people losing their minds? They're all losing their minds. Are any of them ranting, raving lunatics? Like when you go back and look at the police raid on the voodoo cult, those 45 people that are locked up in asylums, are they crazy? Or are they crazy from our point of view?
Yeah. And that it's so immense that only this person that's stitching all the three of the narratives together sees the whole picture. And that individually, one guy saw a monster at sea and probably feels like crap for the rest of his life. One cop didn't think anything of it until he was asked by this researcher, you know, oh, you found a statuette that looks a lot like the statuette that this artist showed me. Do you want to come talk to me? Can we talk about it? And then the last guy is just making his weird dreams in art. And it looks like something that this guy's uncle was researching. So I'm going to go talk to him and figure out what he's got going on. None of those three characters have the story. This third person has to step back and stitch them all together to see the whole picture. And that's what makes them feel untethered. I think is fantastic. Well, as we slip off to sleep in the asylum, we're confronted by a towering throne of bones and skulls. And we're presented with this gilded skull. So this is our final part.
The Dark Lords of the Void wish to know, where does this media sit upon the throne of skulls?
Obviously, we don't have a lot of media right now in our pantheon.
No.
But I have a feeling this one's going to last for a while. As we go forward, we have to place this on our throne.
I was going to say, in our Throne of Skulls metaphor, is it at the top or is it at the bottom because it's the foundation?
I think we have to put it at the top. It has to go on the top. It has to be the pinnacle right now. So all we have to compare it to is Astartes. Where would you place this in relationship to Astartes in our pile of Grimdark Media?
I would definitely place it ahead of Astartes.
I would agree.
Astartes is a brilliant piece of entertainment. Again, when you're going to rank things, you can't let the thing that is currently second best be diminished by being second best to something that is, in my opinion, better. The issue for me with this is it has inspired so much that has come after it. It's the way it lays the foundation for, again, the world being a darker place, a more mysterious place, a place where the thing that will end you is just out of reach, is just out of vision.
You don't have the moment in Astartes where the giant, the thing that they can't perceive, this energy monster that sucks them in between dimensions, looks kind of like a squid and has weird tendrils. Like, you don't have that moment without Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
There is an eldritch horror moment in that thing that I think shows how far Cthulhu's dreams reach basically into the future for the next 100 years. So I would agree. I think we have to put Call of Cthulhu right now on the top of the Throne of Skulls.
Top of the pile. Well, be interesting to see what knocks it off.
Yeah.
A better Lovecraft story.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see how many times we reference this particular story in the future, because I think that this has impact in this media landscape basically forever. It's going to be hard to knock this one off the top, I think.
Absolutely.
Because I could reference 100 movies right now that aren't adaptations of Lovecraft stories that have elements of this stuff in it.
Again, it's not necessarily that you're constantly going to see the same piece of material be redone, but you can't. There's certain things you can't read and not be inspired by.
Yeah.
I remember reading an interview years ago that like everybody on the creative team for Lost had read Watchmen.
Yeah.
Like the two things are not connected at all, but this was a shared experience they all had in terms of storytelling.
Right.
This feels like one of those things like you could, I made the joking, do you read Sutter Kane reference? But I mean, if you went to a horror convention and asked every author and artist there if they read H.P. Lovecraft, would you find anybody who said no?
Yeah, I doubt it. I mean, this is the appendix N of it all, right? I think the appendix N of it all is going to end up being, you can't, everyone has, and even if you're not inspired by these writings directly, you've read or watched or been entertained by something inspired by it.
Exactly.
And so you are by proxy taking that away and maybe interpolating that into what you make, integrating it into your thoughts and your art and what you're making in the future. So this was a way back to the very beginning of Grimdark, I think.
So I'll ask again. I know it's been covered before, but by somebody. Obviously, you've seen Cloverfield.
Yep.
Did you realize the first time you watched it? Because I didn't realize the first time I watched it that you actually see the thing coming out of the water after it comes down from the sky.
No.
So there's a splash in the water before you see the thing emerge from the water, which again it's a very short time frame, but the whole idea for it is this thing coming from under the waves came from space in the first place.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny how that, I mean, the Mist, right? Like Stephen King's fully admitted the Mist is a Lovecraft story. Like you have all of these stories that that are homages almost by artists that felt compelled to play in this same world, to play in this same thing. And it's funny because there's so much other media Lovecraft's done that aren't in this mythos. Like, I would love to do the Silver Key stuff because it's all like the dreamscape, or even he's just done straight hard sci-fi.
Yeah.
In the Walls of Eryx is one of my favorite pieces of science fiction literature, where it's just a guy lost in an invisible maze on an alien planet. He's like a prospector.
Yeah.
And it's funny how Lovecraft is so known for this grimdark sort of like writing style, and the themes are kind of universal, but Call of Cthulhu and its sort of like cult, eldritch sort of like horror thing is definitely the one that he is best known for, and the one that kind of like kicks into the other.
Because it inspired and informed so many other people, it's why so much of it has remained in print.
Yeah.
And it's the thing, there's, you know, you may, and you go through this with things that are only like 10, 15, 20 years old, you may decide you really want to rewatch a movie or reread a book that you don't own a copy of anymore and go to find it, and it just can't be found. It's just not out there.
I went recently to try and find a bunch of I had to go to used bookstores to go find all that Harlan Ellison stuff because I couldn't find it in print anymore. It just wasn't in print.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
Which is just crazy. But again, so you may have written other things. Your most financially successful project as an author might have been something completely unrelated. I always forget exactly what it is, but I think with Poe, his most successful publication in his lifetime was a book about gardening or something like that.
Yeah.
I doubt you can find that anywhere.
Nope, absolutely not. And yet this past month we had what's his name? The guy from Midnight Mass. Mike Flanagan.
Yeah.
His new series which is The Fall of the House of Usher, which is literally every Poe short story stitched together as an 8-episode TV show. And it's fantastic, by the way.
Yeah.
It is cruel and delightfully malevolent and well acted, and it's funny because Mike Flanagan, like, they're all great to me. I don't want to rank them against each other. This one's so different. It's less self-serious, but man, what a wonderfully dark, grim Edgar Allan Poe adaptation. We should probably do that one at some point.
We're getting there, I think.
Feels
so. Like we're getting there.
All right, well, thanks for watching, guys. This was our first literary stint into Grimdark Media. For those of you who want some spoilers, we're going to games for the third one, and then we're going to repeat the cycle. So we're going back to film, and you get to pick the film this time. So why don't we give some watch ahead topic spoilers, because that way we don't have to do so many spoiler warnings when we spoil everything in the future. So for games, we're actually going to be doing a Grimdark Media breakdown of The Last of Us Part 2, which I'm very excited about because, and not Part 1, for very important reasons.
Yes.
And what are we going to do for literary or for film next time?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
We don't have to say. We could say it at the end of the next one.
Let's say it at the end of the next one, because I've got a couple things and I'm not positive.
You haven't decided on yet? Yeah. Okay. But for those of you who want to go watch plot synopsis or if you haven't played The Last of Us Part 2, I think it's like almost 10 years old now, so I should be okay with getting away with doing this. If you haven't already played.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, if we get anybody calling us out for a spoiler warning on a 95-year-old short story, I might just have to give up on the internet.
Yeah, that's right. I felt we didn't need a spoiler warning this one, but we should keep doing the spoiler warnings because we will spoil everything on this show. So anyway, thanks for watching. We'll be back with more Grimdark Media. Until then, I'm Ash, and this is Jay.
Peace out.
Bye, everybody.